What do you do if you write a paper but you don't have access to a crucial piece of information? Do you wait until it becomes available, or do you publish your research in the form that is in? It's been almost 3 years since the pandemic made travel, access to information, and just research in general much more difficult. At one point, the university libraries closed, and later we were only able to access books digitally, which made the whole process of research much more cumbersome and difficult. What under normal circumstances would have taken a few minutes of time, for example, checking a page number in a reference, at that point could take a whole week while you were waiting for librarians to scan the relevant pages for you, or you had to sign up and book a slot to use the library. So if you have been a graduate student in these 3 years, I think your experience has been very different from that of other students, say 5 years ago. You might have planned your research in advance, but then you found that you could not actually get access to the material you needed. This has been even more so for visiting archives or libraries where you would have access to first-hand material. So say you were working on a specific body of material, and for that you needed to have access to archives in Lyon. You found yourself not being able to access this material. So what can you do? And obviously you can do two things. So one of them is that you wait. You bide your time and you wait until things normalize. And this might have been a good idea at the beginning of the pandemic, but after a year or two, it became obvious that the situation was not going to improve anytime soon. And so waiting might be an option for an established scholar who can work on a number of other projects in the meantime. But for somebody in graduate school, this actually creates a problem. You cannot wait indefinitely for things to improve. You have to get on with your dissertation. You have a schedule and you might have funding or not have funding. In either case, you have to finish your dissertation by a certain time. So in these cases, I think it's much better to go with the second option, that is not wait. But rather than just publishing your research in the form it is in, that is lacking some substantial body of evidence, I think it's better to pivot and adjust your perspective. Basically present the same research from a different point of view, focusing on something else. And so I don't think that this inability to access material should be a negative thing. It certainly should not create the black box of missing material in your dissertation or your paper. Instead, you would have to find an angle to present your research in a different way, focusing on something else. And that, of course, means that you would have to deviate from your original plan. So you would not be writing the same dissertation as you originally intended. But that's completely okay, because your original plan was also kind of ad hoc. You came up with that plan, so you should feel free to change that plan and adjust according to your possibilities. And actually, when you pivot and try to find ways to present your material that you already have, can produce some really creative outcome. This is when you're forced to be creative and come up with solutions you haven't thought about before. And so I think these constraints in the long term can be quite productive and take your research in a direction you haven't thought of before. And in the end, I have to add that before the pandemic, we were kind of spoiled in terms of how much primary sources we had access to. If you did research 30, 40, 50 years ago, you had no way of accessing so much material, so you would be working with much fewer sources. And yet some scholars produced amazing research we still read today and find useful. So you could think of this situation in the pandemic kind of like a correction. It's not an all-out disaster, it's more like a return to a more normal situation. Okay, I hope these thoughts were useful. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching and see you next time.